You may have a clear lab diagram on paper, but when it comes to building it in VMware, things can quickly get confusing. Where should the WAN connect? How should the LAN be separated? Which VMnet should be assigned to each interface? For example, suppose you have a firewall or router with 4 network interfaces. You need to simulate 2 WAN networks, WAN 1 and WAN 2, and 2 internal LAN networks, LAN 11 and LAN 12. In this video, I'll show you how to map those networks into VMware VMnets and build the complete lab environment step by step. Now let's see how to build this topology using VMware Virtual Network Editor. I use VMnet 11 for LAN 11 and VMnet 12 for LAN 12. For WAN 2, I use VMnet 1 in bridge mode so it connects directly to the external physical network. For WAN 1, I use VMnet 8 in NAT mode to simulate an internet connection inside the lab. With these VMnet settings, we can recreate the original topology with 2 WAN links and 2 LAN networks directly in VMware. Now, let's open the Virtual Network Editor with administrator privileges and begin configuring the VMnets for this lab topology. As you can see, I have already configured several VMnets before. Now I will restore the default settings so we can start again from the beginning. Since I configured quite a few VMnets earlier, this process may take a little longer. After restoring the default settings, the system will automatically create 3 VMnets. VMnet 0, VMnet 1, and VMnet 8. Now we will configure each VMnet step by step according to the lab topology. First, we will create VMnet 11 for the LA11 network. After creating it, we will set VMnet 11 to host-only mode for the internal LAN network. Also, make sure the Connect a Host Virtual Adapter to this network option is enabled so the host machine can connect to this network. For the DHCP option, I usually disable it so that the DHCP server can later be provided by the firewall, router, or switch within the lab environment. Next, enter the subnet IP and subnet mask that you want to use for this network. Once finished, click Apply to save the configuration. At this point, VMnet 11 has been configured for LAN 11, and any virtual machines connected to this VMnet will be in the same internal network segment we just created. Similarly, create VMnet 12 for the LAN 12 network. Configure the settings the same as VMnet 11, only change the subnet IP to match the LAN 12 network. Okay, now we have finished configuring the VMnets for the internal networks. If your network topology has more than 2 LAN segments, you can create additional VMnets as needed. Next, we will configure VMnet 1 to simulate WAN 2. This VMnet will act as an external uplink, allowing virtual machines connected to VMnet 1 to access the internet or reach the physical network through the host machine's network adapter. From the list of virtual networks, select VMnet 1 to begin configuring the WAN 2 network. If you see a message like this, don't worry. First, change VMnet 0 to host-only or NAT mode, then continue with the configuration. Now, select VMnet 1 again and set the network mode to Bridged. Next, in the Bridged to section, select the physical network adapter on your computer. In this mode, VMnet 1 is bridged directly to the real network adapter, allowing virtual machines connected to this VMnet to access the external network as independent devices on the same network. Next, select VMnet 8 to configure the simulated WAN 1 network. For VMnet 8, select NAT mode. In this mode, virtual machines access the external network through the host machine's IP address, allowing us to simulate a separate internet connection inside the lab environment. For these two options, we will enable both and allow VMware to manage the DHCP server for this network. For the subnet IP and subnet mask, you can keep the default values. However, if you want to simulate a public IP range in the lab environment, you can change these settings accordingly. First, access the calculator website. This tool helps you calculate and determine the appropriate IP range when simulating a public network segment in the lab environment. Next, to create the desired network range, first select the appropriate subnet mask. In this example, I will choose a subnet mask of 28. Next, enter an IP address within the network range that you want to use. Then, click Calculate to let the system generate the network range for you. The system will return the network ranges that match the IP address and subnet mask you entered in the previous step. You only need to choose the range that fits your simulation needs. In this example, I will choose the network range starting from 80 with a /28 subnet mask. With this range, we will have 16 available IP addresses. Now, you just need to enter the selected network range into the subnet IP and subnet mask fields for VMnet 8. Then, click Apply to apply the configuration. After that, if you want to configure DHCP for this VMnet, click DHCP Settings. Here, you can configure the DHCP settings in more detail, such as the starting and ending IP addresses for the DHCP range. You can also configure the IP lease time. Here, I will set the minimum lease time to 1 day, so the virtual machines can keep stable IP addresses during the lab. Once the settings are complete, click Apply to save the configuration. At this point, we have completed the VMnet configuration based on the original lab topology, and the virtual network environment is now ready for deploying virtual machines into their corresponding network segments. Next, we need to reconfigure the IP settings on the host for these VMnets, so the virtual networks can operate correctly based on the configuration we just created. Now, open the control panel and go to the network settings on your computer. Here, you will see the virtual network adapters that have been added to the system's Network Connections Manager. To make management easier, I recommend renaming the default network adapters to something more recognizable. Okay, next, since VMnet 1 and VMnet 8 are used to simulate the two WAN networks and both use DHCP, there is no need to manually configure IP addresses for these adapters on the host machine. However, for VMnet 11 and VMnet 12, DHCP is not configured, so we need to assign static IP addresses to these adapters on the host machine so the host can communicate with the virtual machines in those internal networks.
please configure a static IP address within the LAN 11 network range. You can choose any suitable IP address within this range. At this stage, you only need to set two basic parameters, the IP address and the subnet mask, to ensure the machine can operate within the same LAN network. Similarly, please configure an IP address for the host on VMnet 12 within the LAN 12 network range. Alright, so we have successfully completed the VMnet topology setup for our lab environment based on the designed architecture. In the next videos, we will continue building systems such as pfSense, FortiGate, Microtech on top of this topology to create a complete and practical lab environment. If you find this content helpful, don't forget to subscribe to support the channel. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next videos.